Yes. We got to start. Right. Good evening. Today is May 12th, 2014. I'd like to welcome you all to the council meeting. And we've already started our meeting officially at 5 p.m., but I'd like to ask you now to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we're going to start with comments from the public. And as normal, we'll start with the people who signed up on the sign-up sheet that was on the podium. If you haven't signed the sheet, there'll still be an opportunity for you to speak, but we'll start with those who signed up first. So I'd like to call up Henry Singer first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As she said, my name is Henry Singer. I'm from Princeton. And I just had a couple of quick questions, and I'm sorry you caught me in the middle of finishing my notes, but there we go. Okay, regarding the recent announcement of the agreement between Princeton University and the town over a voluntary contribution, I have three very related questions. One was, what was the basis of the amount? Was it something like last year's plus a growth, or was it cost roll-up type of build-up from the bottom, or was it a percent of the total theoretical taxable amount? If the institution were taxable, what would they pay? That kind of, what was the basis? That's the first question. And before you answer it, I'll lay the other two out because they are related. The second question was, what kind of growth assumptions were made? We have a multi-year agreement, that's fine. If I was a homeowner, I'm going to add to my house, and I knew I was going to add to it, I'd probably negotiate with you before I did the addition, right? So if there's going to be new activity, I know President Eisgruber has said they're going to increase enrollment, or at least has hinted as such in the papers. So what assumptions of growth over the period of the agreement? And thirdly, there's a fair amount of discussion in the press about foreign nationals coming to elite institutions. I think Harvard was quoted in the New York Times of having 27% of the student body is foreign nationals. I think Princeton was somewhere 9% of thereabouts. So what role did foreign nationals and potentially the growth of foreign nationals at the university play in arriving at the amount? Okay? And I don't know if I should sit down or if you will give me an answer.
It's probably more comfortable if you say. I'm going to defer to Council President Bernie Miller on this one.
I'm not going to try and answer your questions as you've posed them, and I would appreciate it very much if you could give me the list of questions, and I will then try and get back to you with answers.
Certainly. I'll do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Paul Driscoll. And I don't mean to pick on you, but I just want to remind everybody we ask that you try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. You did fine.
I usually keep it short. I have a question about the pre-demolition, I don't know what you call it, of the hospital site. And I think my question is, we know that materials are being removed such as ceiling tiles and light fixtures, etc. In fact, I think I asked the question a couple of weeks ago as to the procedures on that. And I wanted to know if there's anybody from the government of the town that actually monitors that on a regular basis, or actually does Arbor Whitman actually go there himself from time to time to see how it's being done? That's my first question. Or do you want me to go through the whole list?
Why don't you get through the whole list, and then we'll make sure we answer them all.
Okay.
To our ability.
And then the other thing is, I've heard that there's some untrained workers that are actually going in and removing debris. And is it necessary to have more skilled workers, considering the nature that some of the ceiling lights or tiles could have PCBs, that you might need some skilled workers removing that? It's just a question that I'm bringing up at this time, because it does seem to me that certain activities there, it's quite obvious, are going forward.
You want me to try on the first couple, Mayor?
Yes.
Okay. With the questions that you've asked, first of all, our construction official is monitoring the current work that is going on in the hospital, right? And so I know he was in last week a couple of times. I know he took Bob Kaiser and Jack West on a tour of the hospital to go through what the work is. So it's our inspection staff that is currently monitoring what is going on inside the building. With regards to the concern over the staffing, he indicated to me that they are, that for instance, for the electrical work, that they're taking out all the wiring and that type of thing. Those are journeyman, electric workers. I'm not sure what that phraseology means, but they're recognized. They do work throughout the community in the state of New Jersey, and they're able to do that under the supervision of a licensed electrician. So they're removing that. The dead wiring and that type of thing from the walls.
Can you confirm all the materials that are being removed, that are allowed to be removed before an agreement is actually signed? What are they actually removing?
I can't name them all. I mean, maybe Bob can help me on that. I'm sure I would forget a couple.
Sure. As Mr. Brusha indicated, we've been in with Mr. Pettinati, and we had another visit as of this afternoon with Mr. Pettinati, Mr. West, and also Mr. Logan, our electrical inspector, as well. But what they are doing is just as you say. They're removing ceiling tiles. They're removing the lighting. They're sorting out the ballast of the lights, and these are the journeyman electricians who are doing this type work, and also some of the asbestos workers as well that are have the proper safety equipment. But they're sorting the ballast out. I guess 95% of them do not have PCBs, and some, if they're not marked no PCBs, they just assume they are PCBs, and they showed us where they're keeping those ballast and storing them. In addition, they're taking the wiring out, and they're stripping the wiring, so they have the copper stored in various containers, taking the carpeting out as well. And we inquired regarding the unskilled workers who were local people that they've hired, and they're only using those to remove materials such as the carpeting, such as partitions, that sort of thing. And they have, today I guess they had 22 workers there, and 10 of those workers are local unskilled workers, and the others were all skilled workers. We were impressed. The operation is very organized. They're conducting themselves in a professional manner, and they were very open to any questions that we had, and we took an extensive tour of the facilities.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Linda Auerbach.
Hello, Linda Auerbach, Lytle Street. Regarding the unskilled workers, I believe there are a number of licensed, and I believe they're union, but I'm not certain, workers who come in from, I think it's Union City. I'm not certain about that. I've spoken with several people. The remainder, and I've established this for a fact, are roughly between 20 and 30 Guatemalan, Honduran, to Ecuadorian men of varying ages. It seemed to me, I watched as they left the site at 3:30 on 2 days. And I'm concerned because I don't know what sort of a contract they've signed, what kind of protections they have, but under the pre-demolition phase of the project, are there certain criteria that have to be met for a minimum level of competence, number one, and is something like, I mean, since most of the men are undocumented, several of them whom I've known for 15, 20 years as restaurant workers, landscapers. I knew their fathers, uncles, aunts, the whole shebang. What kind of working conditions are they involved in? Are they're going off-site during the day to get lunch? And I just wondered during the work that's going to be going on, as far as I understood it, maybe not for pre-demolition, but certainly for the full-fledged demolition phase of things. I seem to remember reading a paragraph about workers not being allowed in the town or off-site during their work shifts. So I was concerned about the issue of contamination, both for those workers, possibly bringing something off-site also. And I did find out that some of them are involved, this was very upsetting to me, in removing ceiling tiles. But in the last week, I believe they were given the simple, like, N95 masks to use. I'm still working on getting more information about that. And when Mr. Kaiser referred to 95% not PCB containing, there's still the worrisome 5%, of course, but can I ask where you get that figure? Thank you.
Sure. If I can respond, it was from inspection of the containers holding the ballast that were marked, and we witnessed it marked no PCBs, and versus a very small container of those that they said didn't have any markings. And regarding whether the unskilled people were involved with the removing the ballast or not, we inquired about that, and they assured us that no, it's only the skilled workers that are removing the lighting, that the unskilled workers are just simply doing the partitions and the carpeting and things such as that. And we went to an area and observed the unskilled workers, and they had hard hats and safety masks and so forth.
May I ask when you did that?
This afternoon.
Okay, because it's been ongoing for 4 weeks, so I'm concerned that...
The latest this afternoon, we were in last week as well.
Okay. Just a concern, because I know these gentlemen, and several of them will not speak to me. Apparently, I can't confirm this, will not speak to me after so many years. I assume they are scared they will lose their jobs if Linda speaks up for them. But I've tried to reassure them that I don't think they'll lose their jobs, but they might get some protections. Also, as I said before, what are the criteria for Yanutsi? Do they have to demonstrate to you, in other words, a manifest listing the names, ages, addresses, etc., and of these unskilled, I mean, they're largely restaurant and landscaping workers that I know of. Is there any sort of listing of employees by the subcontractors that is part of the pre-demolition phase of this? And that's my final question.
Sure. There's no requirement on behalf of the town for us to monitor those workers.
Okay, because they're residents of the town, just like the rest of us, so I'm interested in them from that standpoint also.
Okay.
And I realize they are taking the risk on themselves, but I'm nonetheless concerned as a mother hen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Arata Polinsky.
Areta Plinsky, Harris Road. Just following up on the PCB issue, I want to quote 2 sentences from page 10 of Avalon Bay's survey. EWMA inspected several fixtures and the light ballasts were identified with, quote, no PCBs. This should not conclude that all of the light ballasts are non-PCB containing. So to follow up, who is determining which light ballasts have PCBs? And I assume you're saying if the ballast itself has a marking, that's assuming it, and otherwise it's going into a bin I guess my question is, who's doing that sorting, and what happens with the ones identified as having PCBs? Do you want me to go through the rest of my questions?
Let me go ahead and respond to that one. They have trained workers who are actually taking the light fixtures down and then removing the ballasts, and they actually showed us, and I have a photograph of one, and where it lists no PCBs. So they check, and if it says no PCBs, then it goes into one container. And Larry Logan, our electrical inspector, confirmed, he said, light fixtures from the past 30 years don't have PCBs. So he said, I'm not surprised that there's very few that they're finding of old light fixtures that may have PCBs. But if it isn't marked no PCBs, they're just assuming it does have PCBs. They're putting it in a different container, and they say that they're properly disposing of it.
So you said you had been there with Mr. Pettinati a couple of times. My question is, how long was each visit, and are you checking in with one foreman, the same foreman, every time, and looking at logs of activities?
No, we are not. We're just simply checking, seeing what is happening. We've met with different people. We don't go announced. We just show up, and they say that's fine. Today they're working on the removal of all those internal building items. They've done prep work for asbestos removal, but they haven't actually started on the asbestos removal. They're waiting for the electrical permit so they can have temporary electric before they start on the asbestos removal. Also, the underground fuel tank removals work started today, and they plan to remove the first tank, which is a smaller 2,000-gallon tank, tomorrow, weather permitting.
Has Dr. Whitman been there, and how can the public be aware in an easy way how many times the site has been inspected and by whom, so that we're not burdening you with emails or calls or what have you, but the community wants reassurance that someone is paying attention to what's happening, especially when we hear secondhand that ceiling tiles and flooring is being removed, because a lot of the ceiling materials and flooring material are noted in the asbestos survey as asbestos-containing materials.
Correct. And regarding those asbestos items, they pointed out to us which contained asbestos, which didn't, and our chief building inspector confirmed that was his understanding as well. And regarding when municipal staff are in there, if you contact me, we'll see if we can provide that information.
And Dr. Whitman?
What's that?
Dr. Whitman?
Dr. Whitman has not been in the building, but his people have been stopping by. So we'll see if we can coordinate information as to who's been in and when.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And I'd also ask Mr. Kaiser, just at all of our meetings, when you do your reports, if you can just brief council on, how many times staff has been in the building, and if there's anything we should know that's abnormal from your visits there.
Yes, I'd be happy to. What they've indicated is with the fuel tank removal, They had emailed us that they thought that could take up to 4 weeks, but speaking with the people on site, they anticipate that the fuel tank removal will be done in 2 weeks, weather permitting. Of course, the soil will be sampled and so forth, and they've indicated once they've done a lot of the prep work for asbestos removal, but once they get started on the asbestos removal, they anticipate that taking up to 12 weeks on the asbestos removal.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of the list of the people who've signed up ahead of time to speak, so I'd like to open it up to any other members of the public who'd like to speak on items that are not on the agenda. And if you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Heidi Fichtenbaum, 38 Carnahan Place. I was under the impression that you guys are going to be listening to a presentation on energy issues.
That's under presentation, energy aggregation.
Okay, I guess I'm blind, sorry.
Stay tuned. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. And we have a proclamation for tonight that I will read. Whereas the municipality of Princeton is a bike-friendly community in New Jersey, as designated by the League of American Bicyclists, and whereas the Mayor's Wellness Campaign promotes active living and healthy lifestyles, and whereas the municipality of Princeton recognizes bicycling as an integral part of complete streets and endeavors to promote safe and responsible bicycling by providing suitable accommodations, and whereas bicycle commuting is an effective means to improve air quality, reduce traffic congestion and noise, conserve energy, and reduce household transportation expense. Now therefore, I, Liz Lempert, Mayor of the Municipality of Princeton, on behalf of the council, staff, and residents, do hereby proclaim May as Bike Month, and specifically May 12th through 16th, 2014 as Bike to Work Week, May 16th, 2014 as Bike to Work Day, and May 19th to 23rd, 2014 as Walk and Bike to School Week, and encourage all residents and local employees to register to bike to work by visiting the Greater Mercer TMA website. So, and I want to recognize there's a couple members I think I saw before the meeting. Sam's still here? I think there are a couple. No, he's not. Never mind then. But today was a beautiful day to bike. I'm not sure if the rest of the week is going to be so nice, but hopefully there'll be other opportunities in May and the rest of the year for biking.
Mayor,
Yes.
in honor of this, I got out my bike today to bike with my son to school, and it had 2 flats. So I encourage folks to check out their bikes and see if they're working. But thank you for bringing this to us.
Okay. All right, and now we have 2 presentations for this evening. The second one will be on energy aggregation, but first I'd like to invite up Kristen Applegate from Princeton University to update us on the Arts and Transit construction project.
We'll wait for the magic screen to appear in front of us. So I think this is probably the 4th or 5th time that I've been here with my colleague Ann St. Mauro, who is our assistant.
I'm not sure your mic's on.
It seems like it's on. Okay. So thank you for having me again. Ann St. Mauro, our Assistant Vice President for Design and Construction, is here with me tonight, as is Kate Jones, who is our Project Manager for the Arts and Transit Project. As promised, we're coming before you each time we have a milestone for the project, and wanted to give you an update tonight about work that you will start to see as part of the Arts and Transit Project starting on June 4th, which is, yes, the day after commencement. So we will be getting started in this next phase of work in earnest. As you'll see noted at the top of the screen, we expect that this phase of the work will start on June 4th and end sometime mid-July. We're hoping that that date is actually close to July 9th, because that coincides with some work that is planned for down on Faculty Road. So we'll be working rapidly through this phase. What this phase primarily entails is the closure of University Place to enable the project team to redo the crosswalk area between the Berlin Theater and the North Station building. That entails a lot of hardscape work. It entails taking out the existing crosswalk that is in place across University Place right now, taking that out and replacing it. What we plan to do, and you'll see marked on the map that is on the screens in front of you, and hopefully the people who are watching at home can see this. There's an area that is marked in orange, and that's to signify where the closure is. So you will still be able to get to the Wawa in the current location, very important. The parking lot next to the Wawa will remain open. You'll be able to come in, go into the parking lot, and you'll be able to come back out. You just won't be able to go up and through on University Place. The temporary traffic light that was in use last summer when we were doing the roundabout construction, we are going to take down that temporary traffic light and we're going to move it and install it over on College and Alexander. So you'll see where there's a traffic light, and that's a temporary traffic light to help with the fact that traffic will be flowing up Alexander Street. We plan to put truck route and downtown Princeton signs pointing folks back over to University Place, so when they're in their vehicles, they'll know to head back up University Place. The parking that exists south of College Road on University Place, the majority of that parking, which is I think 12 or 14-hour long-term metered parking, will remain. I'm going to ask for clarification. Is it 6 or 8 spaces? I'm sorry? About a dozen. Okay. So about a dozen of the spaces at the very end that are closest into where the crosswalk is now, those will be bagged because we need to leave a space so if someone comes in and is looking for a parking space, needs to turn around. It is quite wide through there, but we need to leave some space at the end, so if someone needed to turn around, also space for construction vehicles to come in to do some of the work. But the rest of the spaces in that area, the meter spaces, will remain. I have a few slides that really focus in on different elements. Let me see if my little clicker works. It might not. There we go. So pedestrian routes through the area will be impacted. You will not be able to walk through the area between the Berlin Theater and the North Station building. So there'll be pedestrian routes that are marked around the site. You'll be able to walk in between the two former station buildings. You'll see that that's marked as a green path, which will enable you to come down and through, down in front of New South, and you'll be able to come back out if you're trying to head over towards the Wawa or back over towards Alexander Street. Pretty much all of the other walking paths remain as they are now. It's just that where a lot of the intense construction is happening for that month, right through there. So we're just letting everyone know you'll need to plan a route around that section of the construction. As I mentioned, vehicular routes, you'll be able to come up and down Alexander Street to the new temporary traffic light. You are still able to get in and out of the Wawa parking lot. Parking will remain in the station parking lot as it is now with the Muni meters. I understand that some of the parking is coming online as the staff and the police are approving it. Additional parking is coming online as you come down Alexander Street in the vicinity of the commuter parking lot. I already mentioned the fact that the spaces, less about 12 spaces on University Place, will remain open south of College. In terms of transit, one element of this is that the location of the Tiger Paw stop is going to need to be relocated. You'll see here it'll be located on College Road, just to the north side of McCarter Theater. We'll be actually picking up the shelter that's there now, and we'll be moving the shelter temporarily up to that location. So that is where the Tiger Paw and Tiger Transit shuttles will be stopping in this phase of the construction. We've talked about this with McCarter Theater to coordinate. In fact, McCarter was quite interested in this because I guess a lot of their staff are using the Tiger Paw, so this was quite convenient for them. I think Councilwoman Butler has a question.
I was just going to ask a quick question. Is that stop on the McCarter side of the street or on the other side?
It's going to be on the north side, I think. It's
And
on
then
the-
are
on
you
the-
taking out the parking? Isn't there parking on the north
There's a
side
few
of that street?
spaces that will be removed for a period of time. That's a university-owned street.
How many
It's going to be a
spaces?
few, probably
Oh, a
3 to
few.
4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I know, Councilwoman Butler, you've been interested in this before. We are going to pave that stretch of College from Alexander to University Place before we start to do this. Probably see that in the
I
next
have
couple of
been
weeks.
interested, and I
I
will
know.
be very grateful for
Wanted
that.
to mention. It's on its way. The train stays where it is in this phase, the taxis, the freebie location stopping at the Princeton station, and the New Jersey Transit bus stops don't change. So the only bus stop that changes is the Tiger Paw and the location of the Tiger Transit, which had previously been next to the former North Station building, which now kind of is consumed into this phase of construction. And that is my update. This is all posted at princeton.edu/arts and transit. We'll be sending out e-alerts as we do at each phase change a few days beforehand, probably about a week beforehand. We'll share it with the clerk's office. They've been wonderful in working with us to get it posted on the website, and we really appreciate coordinating with the staff to get the communications out to the community so that they can anticipate and make any adjustments to their schedule that might be necessary.
Thank you. Ms. Butler?
Can you tell us a little bit about the changes you'll be making to the crosswalk specifically? Will it be a lighted crosswalk, or the street already narrows at that crosswalk, does it not?
Right.
Yeah, it does.
It's called a table? Yes. What is it called? It's a raised table. Yeah, it's a raised table, so it bumps up and goes flat across.
Didn't we outlaw that?
Oh, can I ask a question?
I think we had a resolution against those, did we not?
That's what I was just going to say.
It's
Didn't
not
we
a
have-
speed bump.
No, specifically, we did not. We left open the possibility
Oh,
of
we
speed
could put
tables.
speed tables in.
Yeah, and they exist, they exist on Murray, right?
On Murray Place, yeah.
Also on Hodge.
I don't know if those are flat on the top or not.
Yeah, they
There.
are, where I live, yeah. Near.
Are there any other questions?
I'm sorry, so then I got distracted by the speed tables. Will they also be lighted, or you?
Yes. We don't put it in the
street-
ground anymore. If
Not
you
in the
notice, when
ground.
we made all the improvements along Washington Road, really, technology has moved past that. So we're not putting the in-ground lighting. It'll be is that where we're having rapid flashing? The RFIB, rapid flashing beacon,
Okay.
is down further on Alexander. So we're moving towards consistent technology. So what you see over on Washington Road is the same sort of technology that you're seeing on Alexander and University in Place. And in fact, it's similar to the technology that the municipality is working to construct along 206, adjacent to where the Merwick project is. So it seems to me that it's all good because it sends the same message to pedestrians and motorists who are in town that when you see these RFIDs, look for a pedestrian, slow down, be cautious.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from council? You have to come up to the mic.
I just have a question, because I can get the word out to a lot of people. On the 655 bus route and the 605 bus route, so when they come from Palmer Square down Nassau, hang a left onto, it will now be Alexander Street,
Right, so if they're...
and they'll keep going?
Well, there's no change, so there's not going to be any change into where the New Jersey Transit buses have been stopping. They've been stopping, and let me go back to the screen here for everyone.
And the university.
Right, Edwards and the used store, and then also down, if they're stopping now, they'd continue to stop down by the Princeton station. So there's no changes
But
to...
there's no stop in front of McCarter Theater, obviously, so...
No, and there hadn't been.
College, right?
There hasn't been for the period of time that the construction's been...
doing.
They moved,
Okay.
New Jersey Transit moved their stops down to the station.
So I'll just make sure.
Sure, great.
you.
That'd be helpful, thanks.
Ms.
Lisa.
Howard?
Just a quick question. Kristen, I don't know whether you guys are tracking or whether it would be us who would do so, but the roundabout seems to be working well, and are we going to know whether we're seeing fewer accidents at that intersection because the roundabout is working well?
Well, unfortunately, you're asking on the day after we actually did have a pedestrian motor vehicle accident at the roundabout.
Okay.
So we did have an incident. It was around 8:15 last night. It was on the north side of the roundabout, and it appears that it was a Princeton University student who was in the crosswalk, and a car came through. Student is going to be okay. I believe from what I heard at the Traffic and Transportation Committee meeting, there was a summons issued. The University Place Alexander intersection had been challenging. There had been incidents there before. Hopefully the rate will decrease, but yes, unfortunately, that was the first.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
But we'll hope with education, there's still a lot of construction in that area. There's a lot of fences. You'll notice a lot of the landscaping is starting to go in. There's a lot of temporary signage that's been up. Permanent signage is going in. So the other thing I also let people know is when we were constructing the roundabout, students were going a little bit north and coming across on the north side and down next to McCarter. And now that the mid-block crossing is there, students are kind of retraining themselves to go across. Old habits die hard. What I just remind everyone is come fall, we'll have a whole new crop of freshmen who don't remember ever walking that way. So we're just letting people know you should be driving slowly through the roundabout. Thankfully, the car that did hit the student was driving slowly, so the injuries were not significant. But you need to be mindful. It's a roundabout. It's just like any other roundabout in New Jersey.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Mr. Simon?
I'm struggling with the speed hump issue. I do apologize, but I'm rereading what I think we passed, and the township therefore prohibits the installation of these types of devices on municipal streets within Princeton Township. And I think we passed the extension of that to the entire Princeton, and specifically the sentence before says speed humps, speed bumps, and raised traffic islands. And I believe that we use the term speed humps where we're not using the terms table. But I think unless I'm missing something, we did actually pass a resolution prohibiting these.
I remember the discussion vaguely. Well, I don't know, maybe Mr. Lanston can help, and I remember Sergeant Murray was here too, and that this had come up as there were actually no speed bumps technically in Princeton, except for on private roads, but that we had left open the possibility for the speed tables because they were, I don't know, maybe I'm misremembering.
I don't remember it that way, but I'm glad to have it be remembered that way because I think it's good to, I did a lot of reading about speed tables and traffic calming devices, and it wasn't clear, so.
And my understanding is the advantage of speed tables, this is what I remember, because this conversation happened about a year ago, but that they're more gentle to the emergency vehicles because you don't have the big bounce. And that was the concern about the speed humps, is that the reason why we were preventing them was because of the damage they caused to the fire trucks. But maybe Mr. Lanston can clarify.
When we discussed the resolution, we referred specifically to speed humps. We did not talk about speed tables. And the table, as I understand it, is the same type of thing that exists on Hodge Road in two places at this point. So we don't have a policy that prohibits them. I personally think they'd have to be considered very judiciously in any case because of all of the concerns we had with fire and rescue and so forth and so on. But what's specific to speed humps was, I believe, the resolution. I think that Councilman Simon has in front of him.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions? Ms. Applegate?
Then thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll probably be back in about October to give you an update on the fall changes, which will be the reopening of the station and the new Wawa, and the opening of the drive into the Lot 7 garage.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Thank you for these updates, too. I think they're...
Thank you. They're very
It's
helpful
helpful
to us as
for us to know what's about to happen.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, our second presentation this evening is on energy aggregation, and I'd like to welcome Kenny Esser from Gable Associates and Ryan Scarbo from Dakotas. And Ms. Krummeler has been working on this project. I don't know if she has any further introduction.
Well, I just wanted to say we met with Bill Harla and Ryan. Bob Brescheid did, and they told us they probably gave us something like this presentation, and it sounded really promising. And so we thought it was a good idea to share it with you all to see if, you know, there was interest on council. And I also want to acknowledge that there are at least two people from the schools, Peter Thompson and Gary Wiseman. Hi, because there might be a project for the second part of this. The demand response program is something that it's possible we could work with the schools on. So they're here to listen to it.
Okay, great. And just as one further preface, the intention of tonight, just because this is a new concept to some of us, is to introduce what this is to both council and to the community and see what the next steps might be if we want to explore it further and get a sense from council if we want to take those next steps or not. Right. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilwoman Krummeler. We did put the presentation together, Mayor, with that in mind as a sort of a preface on the program, both programs. Tonight, we're going to speak about demand response and energy aggregation. My name is Ryan Scarbo. I'm a partner at the Dakotas Fitzpatrick & Cole firm. I am the head of the Green Practice Group for the firm. And with me tonight is Kenny Esser from Gable Associates. The presentation is going to begin this evening with Kenny. He's going to talk to you a little bit about government energy aggregation, and then I'll be back to speak to you about demand response. There are some copies of the presentation in the rear of the room, I believe, for the public as well. And the mayor asked that we give a copy to the township to post on the website. We'll do that tomorrow morning first thing.
Great, thank you. As Ryan mentioned, my name is Kenny Esser. I work for the firm Gable Associates. We're an energy consulting firm out of Highland Park, New Jersey. And the first obvious question is, or answer to the question is that energy aggregation and demand response, they're two wholly separate things impacting totally different communities in different ways. So they're not related, it's just for whatever reason, they're both energy issues, we're bringing them both up here today. Energy aggregation as a concept is very similar to anybody going out and shopping for their electricity on their own. This is just an opportunity to do it in aggregate. Doing so by the statutes that are in place and the regulations, it allows for residents to be part of this program on an opt-out basis and businesses on an opt-in basis. Since on the residential side it's an opt-out basis, they want to build in a lot of protections for the residents. Some of those protections include when we enter into the contract, it must be less than the existing tariff by the utility company. They can opt out at any time without any consequence. So if we enter into a 18-month contract and 3 months in or 17 months in somebody wants to opt out of the program, they may do so. There's no penalties, no strings attached, etc. All of the bid documents, program documents, contracts, etc., are reviewed by Board of Public Utilities and Rate Council staff. There's no extensions. A lot of times for some third-party supply contracts, there could be evergreen provisions. If you don't cancel by, say, a certain date, you automatically are renewed for another year at the rate that's determined by the supplier. There's none of that here. So you've got a fixed rate over a fixed time, 1 to 2, no less than 1 year, no more than 2 years. And at the end of that time, you have to start the entire process all over if you want to do it, which may or may not make sense. That would be something we'd talk about. This is not a program that makes sense all the time. It's just the energy markets right now are structured in a way that may make this program successful. And then last, one of the advantages to the program that kind of differentiates itself from just accepting the default service from the utility company is it actually gives the municipalities an opportunity to alter the energy mix like they don't have the ability now. So, for instance, when we did the Lambertville program, it was important to the mayor of Lambertville that they had a significant renewable energy offering. And that wasn't just 40% or 50%. He wanted a 100% renewable option. And to do so, we couldn't allow that to be an opt-out program because it was going to be much higher than tariff, which it was. So instead, we had to make it an opt-in program for residents that wanted to do that, and residents that just wanted the traditional energy mix that everybody gets in the state of New Jersey today, based on the Renewable Portfolio Standard, may do so on an opt-out basis. Businesses may opt into the program, so their rules are different. The business community success has been very limited, and there's a variety of factors that I don't need to go into now unless you'd like me to. But bottom line is the reason to do this program is to provide savings for the residential community. If there's something that can be achieved in the business community, great, but that should really be viewed as icing on the cake. Legal authority, this just gives you guys the site in case you guys want to look it up. A lot of the rules that I just went over, the consumer protections you'll find in the statute. If you have trouble finding it, just let me know and I'm happy to send over anything you need. The process, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, the way they designed it with the regulations and everything, there's a lot of steps in the process that requires, a utility company gets X document, they get 14 days to get back to you, et cetera. And there's a bunch of steps like that in the process that make the process take about 6 to 7 months from start to finish. So if we were to be hired today, you're probably not seeing energy savings until sometime in December. So it's actually a fairly lengthy process. And for our purposes, that actually may be good to give the energy market a little bit of time to cool. So the first step in the process is adoption of an ordinance. It's just laying the foundation, doesn't obligate you to do anything. You have 2 readings of that. You retain your consulting team, legal counsel. Those first 2 bullets, they can happen in any order, really. Public outreach education. Once the ordinance has been passed on the second reading, we'd host a information session for residents. It typically includes a 30-minute presentation from myself, educating the public on the program, and then answering as many questions as everybody has. We prepare the procurement documents. It's reviewed by the state, as I mentioned, and then we go out to bid. Bids out in the street for 4 to 5 weeks. It's out in the street. We get bids back. We accept bids electronic version, and we recommend an award. Or maybe we won't recommend an award. All depends what we see. The GEA process, again, this is just some of the finer points. The local utility company still stays involved in the process. They're still responsible for maintaining your lights. They're still doing your meter reads. You're still getting one bill from the utility company. None of that stuff changes. They've got no horse in this race, so the fact that you went and shopped for your electricity, PSE&G isn't going to get mad at you. I went over the consumer protections. I went over residents may opt out, businesses opt in, and legal and consulting fees are covered through the procurement process. We only get paid if there's a contract award. So we go through the entire process, and if we get to the end of it and there's no award, even if there's great savings or if there's no savings, that's it. So all that risk is on us. Case studies, this just gives you some recent projects that our firm has been involved with. You see savings ranging from 8 to 15%. The higher savings, the 14, 15%, they're all JCP&L towns. The margins are just bigger there. It's just the way the tariff is designed. The smaller ones, Montgomery, West Orange, at 8.5%. Those are PSE&G towns. Just the way the tariff is structured, the margins are just thinner there. And that's what we're looking at. The one thing before I turn it over to Ryan, I do want to just be upfront about. The energy markets are really rough right now. The margins for this program are super tight. We recently had a bid in Colts Neck. We did not award a contract. It provided about 5% savings, but that was on the cusp of whether or not it was worth it. So we recommended it against an award. The markets are changing. The thing that threw it off was the weird winter we had. But like I said, this is a 6 or 7 month process. What the energy markets will look like in December will be much different. Our analysis will just make sure there's savings over the life of the contract. That's why we want to do something a little bit shorter term, no less than 1 year, no more than 2 years, et cetera. So that's energy aggregation. And here's Ryan.
Wait, can I just ask for clarification about what would our out-of-pocket expenses be? I think that's probably something that's concern to the council.
It varies greatly by municipality. It all depends. Some municipalities want their legal counsel, outside legal counsel, to review a bunch of documents. And so that's outside of us. Others don't. You don't have to. Most of these documents have been vetted many times, sometimes as many dozen times by the utility companies, BPU, and Rate Council. So that's definitely not a step that you have to take. It's just what you feel comfortable with. You could easily incur no costs in this program. But that's really a decision up to you.
You have to use the mic or it doesn't get recorded.
Ultimately, I think Kenny said this, you would recover all of your costs. So the idea is that the program would be zero-cost program for the municipality.
Upon award of contract.
Right.
Yep.
Mr. Lieberman?
Yeah, what is the difference between what you're saying now and I'm paying a third-party Veridian?
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference? Because I'm having savings now.
Yep.
And yeah, what would be the difference?
It's just to give people another option. So if you're happy with Veridian, you don't have to leave. And actually, this program, anybody who has an existing third-party supplier is not brought into this program. They don't opt out. They're never notified, but they would have to take a proactive step to leave your company and come to a program like this. If you join a program like this, you could always go back to them because you can leave our program at any time, right? But essentially, the main dynamics are similar in that you're entering into a third-party supply contract. This just provides you some more protections for the people that don't shop. Only about 15% of people do shop, so it's getting the other 85.
Mr. Miller, and then Ms. Howard.
A couple of questions about your case studies. The savings you cite are first-year savings or savings over the 2-year term of the contract?
Over the life of the contract. Each one's a different term, but it's over the life of the contract.
Over the life of the contract. So some of the contracts were 1 year, some were 2 years?
That's right. As short as 1 year, as long as 2. Yep.
And you cite 6 case studies, all of them achieved savings. Were there any case studies that you did where there were no savings?
Yeah, the only bid we've gone out to bid where there wasn't an award was Colts Neck. And that's the one where I just mentioned, and we're working with them, and we'll probably tackle that again, I don't know, maybe in a few months. We'll look what the energy markets do.
And have these 6 municipalities kept with the program?
Yep, yep, and there's no issues in any one of them. And there's actually 7, because Lambertville and West Amwell are together.
Plumstead has bid twice, right?
Plumstead's bid twice as well, right.
Thank you.
Ms. Howard?
Thanks, Kenny. Let me follow up on Council President Miller's questions. All the folks who've already done it, they're still in their initial contract period. So can you comment on whether these savings will be recurring, or is that going to be a question you're going to face when you have to negotiate the next contract?
You're asking for the existing projects we've already done, right? So, no, it's not recurring. It's going to be different every time we do it. And we're going to have to analyze the energy market. We may very well enter into any of these. We get to the end, say it's a 2-year project, 2-year contract. 18 months in, we're probably going to sit down with the municipality and say, this is what we're seeing in the energy market, and it either makes sense or doesn't make sense to do this program based on those dynamics, and we'll make a recommendation at that time.
We could default back to the prior situation at that point.
Yeah, and there's no harm in doing so. Right, exactly.
And then Lance mentioned the third party. I don't know, I personally feel like I'm being bothered by a lot of calls by people selling that, and so you say up front, no hassle, but from a resident perspective, will they be contacted? Would folks would there be outreach to residents?
Yeah, so the outreach after the second reading of the ordinance, public information, essentially a flyer in a mass mailing. Everybody's going to get one. It's a one-pager, really briefly educating on the program, but more importantly, inviting them out to the public information session where we'll educate them.
But that would be from us.
Well, we handle the mailing. It's kind of like a joint effort. You get to review it, etc.
I think the council was asking if any of the companies will bombard the residents.
Yeah, I'm talking, will any private companies be calling, like sort of what people are facing now, I think, with this new opening of the third party, with the change?
No, because the only way the companies can get through this energy aggregation is to respond to the bid. That's the only way. And so literally the residents, they're going to get the one mailing inviting them to the public information session. They're going to get another mailing, essentially, if an award has been made about the opt-out notice. That's it. It's only 2 mailing. And then they get one from the utility company just confirming. That's it. The entire process, that's the mailings they get.
Yeah. Mr. Lieberman, and then Mr. Miller, and then Mr. Miller.
Yeah, just also there's different pricing with renewable energy and
Oh, yeah.
so is that going to be explained and put forth also?
Well, the mix that you would want is totally up to you. So, the default product is what the state currently offers in the renewable portfolio standard, which is about 13% renewable, right? So that would be the default. Now, if you wanted more, we could talk about 20, 25, 100 if you wanted to go that far. We could talk about those options, but as your energy consultants, we'd have to be honest with you and say, hey, okay, it's great you want to do 50 or 100, but we don't think it's going to be low enough to beat tariff, so you really need to switch this to an opt-in program. We'd have that conversation with you. For Lambertville, what we did was we said we asked to bid it both ways to give people options. So you had the opt-out of the traditional, but then if you wanted to, you could opt into the premium.
Given the variability of weather from year to year, how do you measure the savings?
Yep. So it's a good question. Where we're fortunate is the way the energy market is designed in New Jersey, the default service is a third of the electricity is procured every year. So for this year's price, we know exactly what it's going to be from June 1 through May 31st. It's set in stone from an auction that's held in February. And that price, a third of it was procured this year, a third of it last year, and a third of it the year before. So I know exactly what it's going to be for this entire energy year. Next year, 2/3 of it have already been procured. So when I do that forecast, I already know 2/3 of the price. The remaining third I just have to figure out. And of that, a bunch of those components are already predetermined by various auctions that have taken place. So if I only go out 2 years, I really only have to look at a couple of energy years. And I don't actually have to, there's not too much risk in the forecast because most of the numbers are already known. That's A. B, we would not award a contract if it's less than 5% savings. So that gives a little bit more of a buffer. And, we're going to show you guys the numbers. And so maybe you'd be comfortable with 8%, maybe you wouldn't be, but that ultimately is your decision at the end of the day, and we'd show you that. So you're right, weather does play a role in the markets, but the role that weather plays in the markets impacts future energy markets more than it's impacting the market, say, right now.
But if I'm a homeowner at the tail end of this, trying to assess whether or not I've saved anything, there are a lot of variables that you don't have any control over. Weather is one, setting the thermostat is another, the efficiency of the equipment that's used is another. How do you, in the final analysis, how do you get back to the homeowner and say you've really saved money?
Yep. Well,
as a result of this?
The things you mentioned, the thermostat, the efficiency of the products they use, that doesn't impact the rate. So what I'm talking about is the rate per kilowatt hour that people are using. So obviously somebody who uses more electricity is going to save more dollars per year than somebody not, but their percentage of savings is essentially going to be the same that they achieve. So
so basically your demonstration of savings is really at the aggregate level, and the homeowner has to accept the fact that the energy price to the homeowner has been reduced by the amount that you're talking about here, the 8% to 14 or 15%.
Well, a vast majority of residents, probably the exact number is probably over 90%, are all on the exact same tariff. So they're all paying the exact same rate. That's another issue that we get into with businesses. They're not all paying the same rate, but most are paying the same rate. There's a few people who might be on more hourly pricing or peak or off-peak pricing, and they're more of an anomaly that we work with them specifically to make sure they're doing the right thing. But for the most part, we know exactly what they're paying at the default rate, and so we know the rate we have to beat. And so, yeah, it's an aggregate number, but it's an aggregate number percentage-wise that really applies to everybody.
So maybe you can explain how you will get paid, since if it's no money from us.
Yeah. So it's a great question. Our fee is a price per kilowatt hour. So our fee is, whether you hire our services through an RFP process or directly, we tell you this is what our fee would be per kilowatt hour. The supplier in the RFP is told to assume that rate into their bid, so we only get paid if the bid's successful. So if they bid 9.5 cents a kilowatt hour, that 9.5 cents includes whatever our fee was.
As well as whatever costs the borough has.
That's right.
The municipality has administrative internal costs or extra professional costs, they're all packed into the RFP, and the proposer is told that from the first day.
So they're paying you, but it's basically baked into the rate we're paying, so we know it. So at least it's transparent in the sense that we know what we're paying.
Exactly. Yep.
One of the goals that we established through Sustainable Princeton was to lower our carbon footprint, and one of the difficulties we've had is trying to benchmark, well, what is our carbon footprint? And I don't know, does this program, would this help the municipality track, or at least have a better way of tracking how much energy we're using?
It would. I'm not okay. So I'm going to be able to see all the kilowatt hours that are used in the municipality by people who are not on third-party supply contracts. That's what I'm going to be able to see. So I might be able to see 85% of your town, what the overall usage is, and then from there, we can make some assumptions, right? Like, okay, so of this, say 60% of your town ends up doing this program, so I know what that renewable mix is, and of the 20% that didn't do this are still on default, I know what that is. So we could piece some things together. That's definitely something that could be done. Now, what people who are currently on third-party suppliers, we could guess. We certainly could, because most of them are probably paying the default. So we could come up with a good idea for electricity usage for your residential properties in the town. Businesses, transportation, that's a whole nother game.
Is there a question down here? Ms. Butler?
Yeah, I was going to ask, what conditions need to be present in the energy market for this to be attractive, or conversely, when would it not make sense to do it, generally?
Yep, great question. So New Jersey, I mentioned this before, how they set the default rate. It's essentially a 3-year rolling average. A third of the electricity is procured each year. So in times of electricity prices increasing, it's great because it serves as a hedge, pulling prices down below what market value is. In times when energy markets are declining, unfortunately, it works in the opposite way, where that price that you got a couple years ago is now pulling the price up above market, which is where we're at kind of today, and why in a lot of cases in recent history we've been able to significantly beat what that tariff price is. So in times when electricity prices are just steadily on the rise, it's going to make sense just to stay on the default service. In times when it's a bumpy road or prices are declining, then that's going to be a time when it makes sense to do a GEA program.
Mr. Simon?
Just to play back what I believe your answers to Council President Miller were, the residential default rate for residents who are served by PSE&G and the rate under this program would both be fixed rates. So what you project at the beginning is pretty much guaranteed to be the percentage gain for the year. Am I understanding that correctly?
Almost. The default rate from the utility company is set. It doesn't move for the supply portion of the bill from June 1 to May 31st, okay? So every year. But next year, it's going to be different. I'm not sure it's going to be up or down, but it's going to be different. For this program, if we may enter into a 24-month contract, that entire time is going to be a fixed rate. It's never going to move, no escalation. So in that example, a 24-month contract, the tariff is going to move a little bit in that second year, but our rate is going to stay the same. It's going to stay static.
Okay, I see some people that probably want to comment, so I just want to make sure that council's done with questioning for now, and then I wanted to open it up. Oh,
let's talk about the demand response program. Yeah, that way the school
okay, we'll do demand response, then we'll open it up so people get a chance. Hold your questions.
So the other program we're going to talk about is demand response. As Kenny mentioned in the beginning of the program, this is an unrelated program to government energy aggregation, but Mayor, it is another tool that you could use to advance sustainable Princeton. When we spoke with Councilwoman Crummiller and Mr. Brushy, we discussed the idea of using every tool at your disposal to lower your carbon footprint, reduce your operating costs, and this is one of those programs, in my opinion, underutilized program, but that one that is available to all customers in the northeast of the country. And it is the program that the municipality and the school district could team on if they wish to look at it as a group effort. The program is called Demand Response. It is run by an entity called the PJM. The PJM runs the electric grid for the northeastern part of the United States. It includes, I think, 13 states in the country, from Ohio to New Jersey, Michigan to Kentucky. And essentially, the PJM is responsible for keeping our grid healthy and operating appropriately. They want to make sure there's enough resources at every aspect of the grid to meet demand. And so in order to achieve that, they employ programs like demand response, where they'll enroll customers, asking them at times during grid stress to reduce their energy usage by doing simple things like lowering lights, reducing air conditioning. As you can imagine, the grid is often stressed the most during the summer months, so air conditioning is a pretty simple tool that we can use in the Northeast to lower our stress on the grid. The PJM, in order to entice you to be part of such a program, they offer payments, incentives, essentially. And there's a double opportunity for reward for anyone who participates in the program. The first is a revenue payment that comes from the PJM. But the second is they're also asking you to stop your energy usage or lower it at a time when energy is often most expensive, when the grid is stressed the most. So there is an operating cost savings in that as well. We don't often look too closely at what that savings might be, but it is a savings that can be calculated and looked at the end of an opportunity. So at the end of a particular energy year, you can look and see when you reduced, what you reduced, and correlate that to an actual operating cost savings. The way that you determine whether or not you're a good candidate for demand response, you look at something called your peak load contributions. These are the days, the 5 or 7 days in the year where you're using the most amount of energy as an entity, whether it's the municipality or the school district. You'll look and see where those days fall. Those days, if they show high peak load contributions by your facilities, that indicates that you have a good opportunity for demand response. If you have small peak load contributions, then your opportunity isn't as great. Often, if you don't have a lot of facilities, it makes more sense to team with other entities and go out together because your combined opportunity is more enticing to those who would bid on the opportunity. Essentially, what you would be out doing is you would be out procuring a curtailment service provider. The PJM does not work with customers directly. They designate certain entities called curtailment service providers, and they ask them to line up large portfolios of demand response opportunity. So they'll go to large corporations, municipalities, school districts, sometimes even residents on a voluntary program, and they'll ask them to participate. They'll sign a contract with them, and the contract will essentially say, during the window of April 1st to October, you will agree that if you're given a call, you'll agree to participate in the program and take the following voluntary steps. You can imagine school districts that might be testing in the middle of or at the end of a year. They can't necessarily just turn the lights down or lower the air conditioning. They need optimal conditions for their students, and a municipality may have an emergency condition and not want to cooperate on a given opportunity. If you choose not to fulfill your obligations under the contract, you're not penalized, but you don't receive the revenue payment, a portion of the revenue payment that would come from the program. And the revenue payments are broken up on a quarterly basis, so just because you didn't participate on one call doesn't mean that you lost all of your revenue. It's just stepped down proportionally for each time you don't participate. I can tell you in the last 5 years, I think there's been 3 events called. So essentially, if there are no events called in a given year, you're still paid your revenue payment. There will be a test event. They call you 2 hours ahead of time and say, okay, we're going to run a test event. The curtailment service provider would call you. You would implement your plan. You've qualified. You get all 4 quarterly payments just for simply providing the test opportunity. Things have gotten a lot better in the Northeast, largely because of programs like this, but it is still largely underutilized. There are some school districts participating. There are some larger entities participating, but for the most part, people don't even know the program exists. The way the program is structured is because you're procuring a curtailment service provider under New Jersey law, procurement law, it would be considered a competitive contracting opportunity. You're basically offering someone a concession. They get to come to your facility. The PJM payment that comes in, the curtailment service provider is bidding on splitting that with you. He's going to employ possibly technology, possibly just passive measures to help you get through each event and help you put your plan together. So he takes a piece of the payment from PJM and you get the majority of the payment. What you're bidding for is the largest share, and that's why we encourage procuring the opportunity. Also, under New Jersey law, it would not be possible to directly enter into a contract with a curtailment service provider because it is a concession. So under the competitive contracting process, we get to look at price and other factors. It's not simply a low bid or a highest portion of sharing. We get to look at the company's history. You're entering into a contract for something on the order of 1 to 2 years. These are not long-term contracts. But you do want to make sure that this provider is not going to take the PJM payment and simply vanish. You want to make sure that money is going to find its way back to the municipality or the school district, who's ever participating in the program. So we look at things like their financial background, their ability to perform, demonstrated experience. We look to see how big their portfolio is, because they do have an obligation to the PJM. If they fail to meet their obligation, they do face penalties. However, in the public procurement process, we make it certain that the contract we sign does not have penalties for the municipality or the participating school district. Just like under GEA, all of the costs for developing the RFP, implementing it, they're all rolled into the RFP, and the curtailment service provider makes that payment to the municipality at the time of contract execution. It's transparent from the standpoint that from the first day the document's issued, the costs are stated in the document, they don't change, they're set on specific budgets, and we do have experience in implementing that and sticking to a particular budget. I do have a case study in the slides. Last year, Gable Associates and Dakotas were able to work with Mercer County Improvement Authority and the Mercer County Community College. We implemented a large-scale demand response program for the college. At the end of the day, the college, over a 2-year period, was able to receive a $100,000 revenue payment from the PJM. One half of that payment has already been made. One half will be made in this calendar year. And in addition to that, I believe the split on that program was 80-20. So the college and the government entities received 80% of the payment, and the curtailment service provider took a 20% payment. Again, that is a fully voluntary program. Again, the college is an institution of higher education. They have students, activities, sometimes emergency activities. So if they can't participate, their contract is very clear. They face no penalties. They'll just receive a reduced revenue payment from the PJM. And I think, Mayor, if you'd like, we have a slide that follows that just talks about next steps, but if you want to just talk about what questions there might be and take questions from the public, we're happy to answer them.
Can you just clarify exactly what it would mean? So like there's peak hour, say it's really hot outside, so how long do you have to turn your air conditioning off for? You have to turn it off all day or for an hour? Or
Sure, an event will last no longer than 6 hours. There is a 2-hour head warning when there is going to be an event. Partial participation in an event does qualify. So again, it's proportional, and it would be something that would be worked out with a curtailment service provider. If you knew you had a council meeting, let's say in the evening, but 3 hours before there wasn't anything going on in the municipal building, you could take measures into effect prior to the meeting and then bring them back up again, and that partial participation would qualify.
Okay. Are there other questions?
Let me make sure I understand what you're saying. I believe what you're telling us is that all of the measures that we would take would be under our control.
Absolutely.
This is not a case where, for example, the utility would reduce the voltage.
No, there are programs, to be clear, where you can implement technology in the building, remotely controlled technology that would change fan speed, lighting, switches, all of those kinds of things. You find those more often in a commercial setting or an industrial facility, or let's say a wastewater treatment or drinking water facility, where they have lots of variable frequency drive motors, and they can be controlled slightly or variably. You see that kind of technology, but you wouldn't see someone making an investment like that in the municipal building, and I suspect you wouldn't want someone changing your lights or air conditioning remotely either. So.
No, but for example, as an end user, we could respond by increasing the temperature in the building by 5 degrees.
Absolutely.
That would be a permissible response. It
Yes.
doesn't mean we have to shut off the HVAC. It means we could change the setting on the thermostat.
Right.
To respond to it.
And that is a large part of actually what's going on at Mercer County Community College. You just imagine, though, it's exponential because of the number of facilities and the size of their space. And then they have many public common areas that are glassed, like the front of your building is, where they don't necessarily need common lights in the hallways because they have daytime lighting at the time that the event is being called. So there's lots of measures you could do that are almost imperceptible. Mr. Brush, you might know them because he might be a person that would be contacted to implement the plan. It would have to be someone who's in the building, someone who's familiar with the building and its measures in order to take advantage of that within a 2-hour window.
But this would be a plan that we would lay out beforehand.
Yeah, what would happen is you would procure for the curtailment service provider. They would tell you, this is how much I think I can get out of your facility comfortably, in their opinion. Then they would put the plan together with you. And if that measure changed, that amount changed based on your preferences, that wouldn't terminate your contract with that entity. It would be an iterative process till you obtained a plan that you were comfortable with. The Mercer County plan took almost 2 months to put in place after, a couple committee meetings because there were different, I think they met with the educators at least one time to let them have input into when this was going to happen, how it was going to happen.
Thank you.
Mr. Liebman?
Yeah, have you dealt with municipalities before? And if so, what were the revenue payments that you mentioned that they would receive back?
Yeah, there are not a lot of examples, unfortunately, of municipalities doing this on a large scale. There are some who have been doing it in Hudson County. The county of Hudson County has been doing it for a little while. They're doing it in cooperation with their utility. So it's a different kind of program, but there are many levels of demand response program. There are some that are run by the utility. They don't offer the same kind of payments that PJM offers, unfortunately. I will say this, and in the next steps, one of the things that we would encourage you to do first would be, hopefully at no cost to the municipality, would be to evaluate your peak load contributions with the Gable firm first. Because until you know that there is enough there in the peak load contribution category, it doesn't make any sense for you to spend any money on anybody to run any kind of process for you unless you know you have an opportunity there. So looking at those peak load contributions, they do have experience in doing that. We do have a lot of experience out of the Mercer County project, and we know what the market is willing to do and interested in working with. So,
thank you.
By the way, one other issue, it is really worth procuring the curtailment service provider. There are probably more than 3 or 4 dozen curtailment service providers in New Jersey. So driving that competition in the market would be what the RFP would do for you.
Other questions on here? Any more questions? All right, I'd like to, Ms. Beller.
Question. Weren't we developing a plan about this building to remove mold, and we were having some work done, and when there was going to be a long-term plan for controlling some air quality issues here? Is that?
We have a proposal that we received from one vendor indicating that we should do some work every few years so we don't have a reoccurrence of it. But we have not implemented anything other than their remediation that we did last fall.
Okay, I was just sort of curious whether I'm envisioning kind of raising the temperature during a heat wave would sort of run counter to our other issues, at least in this building or other buildings.
Yeah, I don't know, but certainly worth asking the question.
And Councilwoman, the only thing I could add to that, I certainly am not an expert in that area, but given the frequency of events that occur when you're asked to participate, as I said, a test is 2 hours long. That has happened every year that the program's been in place, but the frequency of actual emergency events being called, there's only been a few times in the last 5 or 6 years that an actual event's really been called. I think PJM, because it's built up such a large portfolio of capacity in the market, it doesn't always need to make these calls on the voluntary consumers. So,
thank you.
Thanks. I'd like to open it up to anybody in the public who has a comment or question.
Heidi Fichtenbaum, 38 Carnahan Place. I guess I have 2 questions. So as part of the demand response process, there would be an energy audit done, is that correct?
bump you off the microphone. For this program, you do not need to do an energy audit. I'm not sure if you're thinking about perhaps energy efficiency work. When you do energy efficiency work, like changing out your lights, windows, boilers, you would first do an energy audit, and then you would undertake the measures recommended in that audit. This is simply just taking the opportunity to reduce your energy usage when energy is most expensive and most stressed on the grid.
So I don't know if the municipality has done a recent audit, energy audit, and if there's an opportunity as part of another program to do that. But I think that would be very beneficial if you haven't done it in a while, to just understand how you're using energy and if there are opportunities to save in addition to the idea of demand response. And then one other question that I had is, obviously for me as a member of Sustainable Princeton and as a member of the Princeton Environmental Commission, I would be very interested in our town looking at this as an opportunity to increase our renewable portfolio. Ideally, I would love for us to have 100% renewable and have residents opting out. But I also know that it, may not be economically viable to do that. But I would be very interested in really understanding the dollars and cents of that. So when you say that it's, extremely expensive to do it that way, what does that really mean if it's 11 cents from PSE&G and it's 9 cents if you do, an aggregation, and then if it's renewable with aggregation, what are you getting there? And is there also the ability to do some kind of analysis that takes us up from the standard 13% renewable that's kind of part of the default portfolio right now to 30%, 40%, 50%, and we're reaching even just a break even. So we're not saving any money. We're still paying that same 11 cents. But we have a much higher component of renewable energy. And that I would really encourage the council to think about, and if you decide that you want to pursue this, because that, to me, is the real opportunity. And we need to be looking for those opportunities, and as part of that, encouraging people, we're taking you this far, and if you want to go all the way, 100%, this is what you can do. I just think it's a tremendous opportunity to reach out to, 85% of our community, and in a blink, we could change how much carbon footprint we have as a town. Because quite frankly, it's mainly residents and businesses. And so this would be a home run. It'd be out of the park. So I really encourage you to study this with vigor and work hard to increase the renewable component. And and maybe even speak to the mayor of Lambertville, find out what their experience is. Obviously, very forward-thinking political will in that town. Thank you.
I can just answer the one question about the savings. I shouldn't have used the term extremely expensive or whatever term I used, because it's all relative. But just to give perspective, the only place where we had the 100% option, so the only case study I have used, Lambertville, West Amwell, they received 10% savings in the standard product using the 13% renewable product. For going with a 100% renewable option, it was a 1% increase upon tariff. And we also have to, I think all your comments are great. It'd be like a conversation to have, and we'd happy to weigh in about some of the prices that we're seeing, et cetera, for the renewable component. But we also have to be honest about what 100% Class 1 renewable actually means, right? It's a lot of landfill gas and things like that. So, but again, that'd be like a conversation we can have. And the good thing is that you have the ability to kind of shape this thing in a lot of different ways, maybe ways that haven't been thought of to date. So it's good.
Great, thank you.
Cherry 24 Dempsey. I think a lot of these concepts actually are quite old. Interruptible power, for instance, has been something that's been around for a long time. And I remember my firm designed a building for the International Finance Corporation in Washington 20 years ago, and the entire load was operated by a computer. So as the load went up, somebody was taken off the system, essentially. And over time, they learned to manage it very well. And but I do think that connecting to renewable sources and a whole program is the way to go, and it takes a lot of money actually to get to that level. So it's not something that you get involved in speciously, but it would be innovative and exciting for the community to do that. So I recommend looking into it further over time.
Thank you. Is anybody else? Okay. Did you want to walk us through some of the next steps?
The next steps were very similar to what Kenny mentioned earlier with the GEA. Essentially, we could provide you with some proposals which you could hold on to while someone looks at your peak load contributions quickly to determine if you really have an opportunity there. And if the conclusion is that there's something that can be worked with, then of course, you can move fairly rapidly. These are not very complex RFPs, but they are competitively contracted RFPs, so there's a statutory process that you run. Essentially, it would probably be something in the range of 20 to 30-day window for procurement. Then you interview the proposers and you prepare an evaluation report. At the end of the report, it would be a recommendation to the mayor and council about how to proceed based on the proposals received. And again, the ultimate decision would be up to you. If you don't like what you see in terms of obligations for some kind of technology, which I don't think we'd see, you could always stop the process at that point. If the contract is awarded, the developer would enter into a contract with you. And we don't bid a contract typically with these opportunities because these entities have very specific contracts that they like to put in place. So what we try to tell them are material terms and conditions that we can or cannot live without. And so they know in the bidding process what kind of comments to expect in the contracting process. And once it's executed, they make a payment to the municipality of your internal and administrative costs. And then they move forward. And the first payment you would receive would be in the first quarter of each calendar year. So if you entered into a contract, let's say at the end of this year, their window begins April 1. So the first payment would come in October, and then it would go that way thereafter for 4 quarters. So their energy year runs usually April 1 to the following year, right after April, and that's how they make their payments. As soon as they get a payment, they'll make the split and forward it to the municipality or the school district, and it will proceed that way for the duration of the contract, no more than 2 years.
Okay. Thank you. So, Ms. Kroller?
Well, so I guess we'll talk offline with the school to find out if they're interested in pursuing this. Oh, Peter?
I'm Peter Thompson, Horner Lane, and I just, 2 questions. One is we log our data through public service for our bigger sites, so we can look at the data, but we would need guidance on, what we're looking for exactly. And just as an example, if we could drop 150 kilowatts on demand, is that enough to be participating in the system, or do you need larger load decreases? What magnitude are we talking about?
Right. So the answer to your first question is the peak load contribution information actually will be specially requested by the energy consultant from the utility. It's not something we can easily see on a bill. They'll actually give those specific dates to the consultant and explain what the total usage of the energy was, either for the municipality or for the district by building, by utility bill. So that's the answer to your first question. The second one is what's a marketable opportunity? It's something that we'd have to look at. I don't believe that 150 kilowatts would be a marketable opportunity. We would want to try and get up in the half of a megawatt range to really make someone stand up and take notice of the RFP. And one of the things we could do is if we get information back and we feel like it's borderline on the PLC information, we can survey a number of curtailment service providers. If there's no procurement on the street, we're free to talk to anyone we want about the opportunity. We could ask them, if you were presented with this, would it be something you would be interested in? We wouldn't speak about numbers, but we would talk about total interest in the package of PLCs that were being offered. And by doing that, we could give you some assurance about whether there be a biddable market for the particular opportunity.
Okay. So I wanted to get a sense from council if there was interest in moving forward with both of these concepts. I'm seeing nodding.
I think at a minimum, getting the peak load information to assess the peak load contribution information, yeah.
Okay. So I want to thank Ms. Krummeler for bringing this to us, and if it's okay with everybody to have you shepherd us through the next steps, would be great. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And now we come to the reports part of our meeting, and we're going to start with a report from Bill Drake. No, is Linda still here? I think Linda might have left, but this in part was prompted by a question we got at our public comment a couple meetings ago about what exactly we do for rental housing and what's the inspection process. So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
I was asked to prepare a memo, which you have in your package, that briefly describes, in summary, from kind of start to finish, all the different nuts and bolts of our program. One of the things that did change, that I do want to point out that did change with consolidation, was the fact that we no longer, at this point in time, do inspect multiple family dwellings. In the former borough, we inspected multiple family dwellings. Our housing stock was a bit older. We dropped that due to staffing reasons. The township did not inspect multiple family dwellings, and we agreed that we would look at that in a few years. And we would keep tabs on it when we do our yearly fire inspections in multiple family dwellings. But other than that, so we're currently only inspecting 1 and 2 family dwellings that are held for rent. That's it. We do not inspect buildings that have 3 units or more in them. They're inspected by the state every 5 years. Other than that, we're proceeding with our inspection process. We've trained our entire staff. We are looking at possibly adding some positions if it's necessary, and get back up to date.
Ms. Howard and then Mr. Liverman.
Thanks, Bill. It was an excellent memo, a well-written memo, and really helpful background. I think the question that jumped out to me, and I think Linda's back in the room now, and she may want to comment on this as well, is you talked about the process and what happened in this case, the house on Lytle and what happened.
Correct.
But it sounded like this was a recurring problem here. And so there were some egregious violations now, and we're handling those as best we can, pursuing the remedies that are available to us, but it sounded like this was not a new violation at this site, and this is something that. And so my question is really: do you feel like we have the remedies, and do you feel like we're able to track repeat violators in a way to be effective? Because it sounds like this was not anything new, and unfortunately, this landlord had been taking advantage of tenants for many years. So, what's the answer in cases like this with repeat violators?
Well, let me first address that. The violations that we found at this property, in this particular case that we outlined here, we do not have a history of those types of violations at this property, nor most rental properties in Princeton. I have been involved in rental housing inspections in Princeton since 1994, and I can tell you I think this is the first time we've really dealt with something this egregious. We do have rental housing properties. We call them problem properties. We maintain a list, and we do keep more stringent enforcement actions, more frequent enforcement actions on those properties. We do inspect them, but unfortunately, due to the age of the buildings and sometimes the number of people that end up living in the buildings, they get beat up. They do get beat up, and they warrant more frequent inspections. But to answer the first part of your question, we don't see the type of egregious violations we see here.
Thank you.
Mr. Liverman.
Thanks, Bill. I'm glad you're here, and the Board of Health inspector is here also. What do we do when we have a house or an apartment, and they put mattresses, trash, and tons of debris outside, and people will call me and say, who do I call or what do I do? So I just need to know with you two here, because I kind of have an idea, but I'd rather hear it from you. Who do you call when that happens in your neighborhood?
Years ago, we had different standards. We had standards regarding garbage and accumulations of trash, how many garbage cans people had to have, who had to provide the garbage cans, where was it stored on the property, who put it out, who was enforcing when it goes out. And I don't think some of those answers, unfortunately, have been answered. We did remove, prior to consolidation, we removed some conflicting requirements between our ordinance and the health ordinance. But if people are putting trash out on the curb, piling mattresses out, I honestly don't know who to call, to be honest with you. It wouldn't be the Rental Housing Bureau. It's a good question, Lance, and I honestly don't have an answer for you.
Mr. Brushheich, do you have an answer to Mr. Limmerman's question? Should I call you?
Yeah, they can call me. Everyone but Lance can call me. No, you just call it the general office number. We get a hold of our vendor. If it warrants, if we see like if there's something strange out there, but we do get it a lot. People move out, they don't know what to do with their belongings if they're changing air, and it ends up at the street. Refuse collection is always a problem. It's not unique, obviously, to our town. We have different problems in the CBD with people that place garbage randomly around town just to get rid of it. But ultimately, we will either, if we can't track down who it belongs to, if it doesn't belong out for refuse collection, then ultimately we'll just get our vendor to pick it up, unfortunately. But they should just call the main office and we'll work with our vendor to get it picked up.
Well, some of this trash hasn't made it to the curb yet. It's like in the front yard of homes. And it's mattresses, and I've seen a sofa, bags of trash. Yep. It hasn't even made it to the curb, and it's like, oh my God, what do you do? And I don't know if it's a landlord issue. I know it's just pathetic.
Well, let me address that because it's a different situation than what I thought you were asking. Well, I thought you were talking about stuff being put at the curb on inappropriate days.
No, it hasn't reached the curb yet.
Okay, so stuff that has not reached the curb, if it is a rental property, we do, between the fire codes that we enforce and the housing codes enforce, we can and we do take action. One of the things that we want to reinstitute in the future that we used to do in the borough years ago was, we called it a quality of life inspection program. We would literally tour neighborhoods and go to the rental properties. We had a list of them, and we would check to see stuff from the outside. We would check to see where's the garbage, is there debris in the yards. This goes back to the days where we had a lot of problems with abandoned cars. So we would like to reinstitute that program.
Please do.
But it's a matter of staffing. But we would certainly be the first phone call. If it's not a rental property, then I believe it will go to the health department. But that's something we are interested in, and that's something we do cite when we go out to the properties.
Thank you.
And we look at them.
Are there any other questions from council? Ms. Butler?
I do have a question. About the 3-unit, is every 5 years by the DCA, is that, they inspect those?
That's their rule. That's a state law. All multiple family dwellings have to be inspected every 5 years by the state.
And if we were to return to doing that, would the state still have to inspect them every 5 years?
Yes, absolutely. What we did in the past was we inspected the same buildings under a local ordinance. There's 2 ways that you can do this. One way is to participate in the state and local cooperative housing inspection program, also known as SHLIP, whereas the state pays us a very minimal fee to do the inspections on their behalf, but they're still every 5 years. We did the local ordinance route instead, so we were inspecting every 5 years also, but we structured our program so that we were alternating every 2.5 years. So multiple family dwellings in Princeton Borough were getting inspected every 2.5 years.
And the owners, when we do that, and when the state does it, the owners of those units pay a fee that presumably covers our cost for
Correct.
the inspection.
That's correct.
And so, for instance, Avalon Bay, unless we were to revisit that ordinance, they would just be inspected once every 5 years by the state. Is that correct?
The individual dwelling units, that is correct. They would be inspected once every 5 years. We do inspect the common areas under the fire code every year.
And if you are inspecting I'm sorry, how often do you do that?
Fire code common areas once every year.
Once every year. And so when you're doing that, then are you free to also make some evaluation of whether you think there is overcrowding? And do you follow up on that, or?
You're talking the multiple family dwellings? Your question has confused me. Sorry.
No, I'm talking about you do inspect the common area for apartment buildings or where there are 3 units or more.
Correct.
And so I'm saying, when you do that, do you use that opportunity to make some assessment of the general condition or things that might lead you to believe that there's overcrowding?
Correct.
More people living. So you do that.
Absolutely.
On that occasion. Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We would absolutely do that. And that's one of the things in the memo that I provided you with last year when we did the housing ordinance harmonization. We talked about how we would be looking for these things and we would be gauging these issues. And if we did feel that there was a need for us to come back and do these inspections again, we would bring that back to you.
Mr. Miller?
A couple of questions, Bill. DCA has lost a lot of staff. Are they really adhering to a 5-year cycle, or has it stretched out beyond the 5 years?
Unfortunately, they don't notify us, so we have no idea if they're doing it every 5 years or not. They don't notify us when they do their inspections, and we wouldn't have a mechanism to track that.
That leads to a second question. Do you get a copy of the report from DCA?
Absolutely not. They're their own entity.
So that if DCA uncovers a violation, they don't notify you?
That's correct. They are the sole enforcement agency in that case.
Sounds like we live in the dark in this case. We don't know how frequently DCA inspects, whether they're adhering to their 5-year schedule.
That's correct.
We have no way of checking whether they're adhering to a 5-year schedule.
That's correct.
And we don't see a report after they've done their inspection.
That's correct. They're not obligated under any state statute or ordinance or law to notify us of that information.
Well, I can say that, because I'm a person that DCA comes out and see. They do come every 5 years. They charge a lot of money. It's a major revenue driver. They hire people for this. They cut other areas, but they don't cut this area because it's a revenue. I pay about $256, $258 every time they come out. Any violation, you pay $100 and some odd dollars, and they can do, 10, 20 places each person a day with no problem. Yes. They make a ton of money off this. So I can tell you personally, they have not missed a 5-year visit to any of my places, and they do come out, believe me. So I can definitely tell you they do that in Princeton.
And you don't think they've sort of put the finger on you on purpose?
I'm wondering. I'm really wondering now. I'm really wondering what's going on here. Well, I'm the only one that they repeat 5 years. 5 years and 1 hour, they're at my door.
Well, but wouldn't the information also be available if you were to seek it out? Could we not find out whether you're complying?
Yeah, I believe so, because they give you a card, they give you a green card saying that you pass and all that stuff.
Right, but the onus would be on us to track down the information.
Yeah, I'm almost positive that that's public information.
That's correct. That's a fair assessment.
Can we identify all of the apartment buildings in town with 3 or more units and make a specific request to the state for their inspection reports on those units?
I can certainly ask. I'm not sure they'll respond to us, but we can certainly ask. We actually have a list of the apartment buildings that were in the former borough. We don't have a list of the apartment buildings that were in the former township, but we're actually working on getting one of those lists from the state, just for our records anyway. So when we evaluate whether or not we need to start doing these inspections again, we would have that information.
Are you evaluating whether we need to do the inspections again?
Absolutely, on an ongoing basis. Absolutely.
And what would make you decide that we need to do them again?
I think my inspector's reporting back to me that we're seeing a deterioration in the conditions of some of the dwellings.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Ms. Beller?
I just want to echo Councilwoman Howard's comment. This was really informative. This was really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Auerbach? Yes, please.
Hardly, I'm not very well tonight. I wanted to thank Mr. Drake for doing what he did. April 8th, which is when I discovered this situation at 11 at night and saw the baby. April 8th didn't happen in a vacuum. I have worked in restaurants in the town. I have translated for hundreds of Guatemalan, Honduran, Ecuadorian people since 1982, 83. There is not a restaurant in town, and I know this for a fact, that is either not employing people under the table or employing them with Social Security numbers that are easily documentable as not legitimate. I'm in a double bind about this because I view the situation of a lot of Central Americans who've come here from my political standpoint as the consequence of the policies of this country starting in the 1950s, and it's just an avalanche that will not stop. And I recognize that overcrowding can present a danger in certain circumstances, especially for firefighters who have to be able to ascertain how many people are in a dwelling before, if there should be a fire, and I'm not aware that there has been one in illegal immigrant housing, as it's called by Mr. Hillier. I am aware, however, of private homes where fires have happened through no fault of the owners, just some accident or something. I realize that overcrowding is primarily an issue of safety for firefighters and first responders who may have to risk their lives to go into a burning building not knowing how many people are properly registered to be living there. So there's that problem. In many of the apartments that I've visited over the last 35 years, there is the responsibility of the owner, under any circumstance, to maintain the property in a livable condition. Many of the immigrants I know have painted, have fixed staircases, have put in their own ceiling tiles, etc., not because the previous tenants destroyed them, but because over a period of 10, 15, 20 years, nothing was ever done to maintain them. Now, why that came to be, I do not know, and I don't assess blame, but from here on, there has to be something different done, and so the issue is the overcrowding versus the safety of the living conditions. I don't believe overcrowding inherently produces unsafe living conditions for the tenants. And as the same that we're a sanctuary city vis-a-vis the police. I wish there could be a year or two set aside, a moratorium of sorts, on the issue of overcrowding. Let the tenants register on leases with their landlords for a 2-year period. They would probably have to find alternate housing in the meantime. But fix the buildings so that whoever occupies them in the future will be safe and not have to go through the nightmare that this family endured. By the way, their profit for their misery, aside from getting their month's rent back, was approximately $400. I called a woman I know, an older woman who's been a friend of mine for years, and I begged her for $1,000 to give them as some sort of justice. She's a very quiet humanitarian in Princeton, well known to some people, and she agreed to it. So I couldn't do anything about it today, but tomorrow I'm going to make sure they get that money. The only other thing is the businesses are profiting by this. They're not paying Social Security taxes. They're not paying workers' comp premiums. And the taxpayers have been bilked. I don't know how many times I've taken an injured worker, an employer for an American, sometimes a Hispanic landscaper, over to the emergency room. They just get dumped, and sometimes there are legal proceedings and the money is recouped. But taxpayers have lost a lot of money because businesses profit from this very enterprise. So I wish the businesses would get behind improving housing for their workers. They've known about this since when I started talking about it in 1983, and there's no excuse, none.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I live on the street. I've lived on it for 14 years, and for 10 years before that across from Jefferson Plumbing. So I'm intimately, for the last 24 years, familiar with tens of households. And it's many different landlords, not just the one who was victorious, in my view. He will not suffer much from this, with the exception of the remark that Mr. Curran made, and I regard it as a birthday present to me, when you stated, and I will not say the name, considered wealthy, so-and-so brought himself to court in a stained jacket. Knowing your personality, that was a birthday present for me. Thank you.
Mr. Curran's literary flourish could be noted in the minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Drake?
Yes, I'd like to address a few things, so make sure we all understand everything. And I do want to thank Linda. She is very helpful to us. She was helpful to us in this last case. In the past, she's brought stuff to our attention. She's kind of the eyes and ears on the street. You know, that the police always find helpful when they have those on the street, and we do also. And we appreciate the time that she puts in, and she certainly has done a great job keeping us in touch with people and translating for us, and it's a very valuable community resource for us. But I want to just make a few things clear. When we talk about overcrowding in rental dwelling units or in any dwelling unit, it's important to know that our housing standards, where they came from, was at the turn of the 19th century. And these were standards that were developed for prevention of communicable diseases. So the number of people who can live in a home, is for disease, communicable disease spread and prevention. Okay, so it is a health issue as to where our housing standards come from and how many people can live in a dwelling. It is a fire concern also. Yes, to a degree that, you know, the fire department certainly needs to know how many people are in a building and whether or not they have to send our firefighters, our precious resource, into harm's way to rescue people, and they absolutely need to know that. But more importantly, one thing to understand is that overcrowding creates fire hazards in and of itself. When we have multiple families living in a dwelling unit that's designed for one, we overtax the electrical systems. We break doors. From a housing code standpoint, doors get worn out, windows get worn out, paint gets destroyed, paint which may be covering lead-based paint underneath it and encapsulating it. So it is certainly a health issue, and it is a fire code issue. Some of the other things that happen when we deal with overcrowded properties is we see the plumbing systems get overtaxed. It is the overcrowding in and of itself. Too many people living in a small quarters creates problems that are not there, and that's one of the reasons that is god-awful important to us. As a volunteer firefighter for over 30 years now, as a fire marshal myself for 28 years, I can tell you it's intrinsically important to me. And when we look at the statistics, that 82% of fatalities from fires happen in homes. That's where we can make the most difference. And I assure you, it's as important to me as it is to anyone in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your report. Now I'd like to turn to council reports. Ms. Howard?
Thanks, Mayor. A couple I want to go through. Public safety, I want to make sure folks know that Saturday is the Wheels Rodeo. Rain date is on Sunday. It's in the parking lot right outside, and they've got helmets for kids and child seat checks and lots of fun, and that's run by the police in conjunction with Human Services. Then speaking of Human Services, and I know council has seen it, but I want to make sure everyone knows that there's a wonderful, exciting first new newsletter from the Human Services Commission. It's up on the website, and Lisa's been getting it out to everybody. It's going to be quarterly, we hope, and it's really an opportunity to highlight different projects of the Human Services Commission and the Human Services Department. And so this one highlights Send Hunger Packing, our community needs assessment, and also all the work on immigration, including wage theft and improving relations with the police department. So really want to commend that to folks and commend the work of Elisa Nera and Laura Encinas, who's a commission member, who did a lot of hard work on this. And finally, on the Board of Health, as Lance mentioned, we do have our health officer, Jeff Grosser, in the audience, and I want to commend work he's been doing. I want to make sure folks know what's going on with our WIC program, which is the Women, Infant, and Children's Program, a program that provides supplemental nutrition to pregnant and breastfeeding women and children up to the age of 5 who are low income. We had seen in town that our participation rates had dropped over the last couple of years, and so which actually put in jeopardy our monthly WIC clinic. But luckily the Children's Home Society has agreed to continue the clinic through the rest of the year to give the health department, working in conjunction with Human Services Department, the opportunity to do more outreach to get our numbers back up, because we are convinced that there is significant need in the community, and this is such a terrific program. We want to make sure that we keep the program in Princeton. So just in short, Jeff has been working with Elisa and others, and they've come up with an outreach plan to increase enrollment. So they've gotten over 1,000 flyers distributed in the community. They've gone door to door in some neighborhoods. They've been working with the Y, Princeton Nursery School, Crisis Ministry to get the word out. And the good news is that this Friday's WIC clinic, which is over at the Department of Health, has already seen an increase in the number of people signing up for appointments. So that outreach appears to be working. Hopefully then we'll be able to make the case to the Children's Home Society for continuing the WIC clinic in Princeton. It's really a worthwhile program. We know that women and kids come in, and they not only do they get their vouchers for food, but they get nutrition counseling, breastfeeding support, and referrals to healthcare services. So really important for folks to know that this is happening. And there'll be a press release going out this week, and I really do implore the press that's in the room to help us get the word out, because we know there are people in the community who would benefit and who aren't currently benefiting. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Cornwell.
I just have a report on the Zoning Amendment Review Committee. Is dealing with the Historic Preservation Ordinance, and if anyone's interested, the next meeting on it is on Monday, May 19th at 9:30 a.m., and there's a couple other meetings, and the notices are up on the website.
Just a very brief report on the solar energy project, where the municipality is serving as a facilitator for a private-public partnership between Princeton Community Housing and a number of firms in the solar and battery business to respond to a request for procurement from PSEG for demonstration projects, and that proposal is moving ahead and will be submitted to PSEG in June. The proposal was invited after the team involving Princeton Community Housing and the private concerns that are working with Princeton Community Housing, and support from the municipality in the form of encouragement and a letter from the mayor got us through the first gate with PSEG to be invited to submit a detailed proposal.
Yeah, I want to thank Councilwoman Butler and Councilman Simon for joining myself for the fire inspection parade that was held on May 3rd. It was a little rainy.